Let us pray. Almighty God, we beseech you to behold with your abundant favor and blessings as your servants whom you have been pleased to call to leadership positions in this republic. We seek guidance to treat and consider all matters that shall come under our deliberation in so just and faithful a manner as to advance the peace, prosperity, and welfare of our country and of those whose interests you have committed to our charge. Amen.
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions.
Senator Kibiru.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table the report on the petition. The petition concerning the irregular purchase of the National Bank of Kenya NBK building in Eldoret by the Uasin Gishu County Executive. Mr. Speaker, I lay the petition. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the members of the committee. Mr. Speaker, you committed this petition to the committee on 24th June 2020. It has taken quite a considerable time, but Mr. Speaker, it was very important that a thorough job be done. Hasten to one that, Mr. Speaker, this was brought into the Senate, to the Senate by Senator Professor Margaret Kamal, and we have been dealing with it ever since. Mr. Speaker, the petitioners had 9 issues which they drew the attention of the Senate to, among them including lack of following certain procedures, and it is all there, Mr. Speaker. We looked at the 9 issues that were raised by the petitioner. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 232-1, you committed this to us, and what we did, Mr. Speaker, to the committee, what the committee did was we held meetings with the petitioners, 2 meetings, held meeting with the executive, the county executive of Uasin Gishu, requested for information for submission from the Ministry of Roads and Physical Planning, requested for information from submissions from the Ministry of Transport, Infrastructure, Housing and Urban Development and Public Works, and I took a familiarization visit to Eldoret, that is in Uasin Gishu County. Mr. Speaker, the committee made a number of observations, and one is that the building earmarked for acquisition at a cost of 570 million, not billion, Mr. Speaker, million, is dilapidated, uninhabitable, neglected, and not maintained for several years. It is the observation of the committee that the cost of renovation and configuration of the building into offices would be higher than the cost of construction of a new block. If it would be made habitable, it requires extensive repairs, configuration into office setup, installation of lifts, and renovation of the plumbing works. The cost associated with these repairs would be equivalent to construction of the new block, Mr. Speaker, as we have said. We didn't, as we mentioned, we met a number of stakeholders, including the petitioners and the executive. And we took into account, as we made our recommendation, the following. We recognize the competing interests that lays out of this inquiry. The effective delivery of services by county government requires that certain administrative requirements such as office space be put in place. On the other hand, the law requires that procurement of public goods and services is underpinned by certain principles, Mr. Speaker. The most important of this is set out in Article 221D of the Constitution, requiring that public money be used in a prudent and responsible way. Further, Article 201E, which requires responsible financial management, and Article 227 of the Constitution further requires that when a state organ or public entity contracts for goods or services, it shall do so in a manner that is inter alia cost effective. Therefore, the committee resolved as follows, Mr. Speaker. The Uasin Gishu County government should expedite the mechanism which would cease payment of rent for office space and provide adequate office space for its operations. Notwithstanding that, noting that there are parcels of land within the town which are owned by the county executive and which would be suitable for construction of office building, and further cognizant that these parcels of land may in some instances be earmarked for other projects, the committee recommends that the county executive should prioritize construction of office building or block. The county executive should abandon the plans to acquire the NBK building and engage in the process of construction of an office block on available land under its ownership. Further, noting that the cost of construction of office block should not exceed the 500 million as per the existing resolutions, which were tabled in this Senate, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, the Uasin Gishu County Executive should stop any further process initiated on the transaction meant to acquire the National Bank of Kenya Limited in Eldoret. So, Mr. Speaker, the committee found that in terms of value for money, we should not allow the county to proceed with buying that building at the cost mentioned there of 570 million. Once again, I thank the members of the committee and urge that counties should adhere to prudent utilization of public funds and more so what we call value for money, and request that the Auditor General's office be keen on checking on some of these processes so that they can highlight them in future audit reports. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you for your report. I don't see any.
We are reporting on not coming through.
Okay.
Yeah. There's something wrong with it.
They are not yet here.
Press there, it's not coming. Because it comes with this.
Okay, Senator Kamar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to make my comments on the petition that I brought here on behalf of the residents of Uasin Gishu County. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the committee for doing an excellent job. It took some time, but I think they needed to really get enough information. The petition that came from the residents of Uasin Gishu County was a petition against the buying of the National Bank building by the county government of Uasin Gishu. And the reasons the people, the residents were against this buying was confirmed by, the reasons were confirmed by the committee when we went down to the ground. We had had sessions with the governor and his team, but when we went to the ground to confirm whether the building was worth the 570 million, it was very shocking, Mr. Speaker, to find that the building was dilapidated. The building had not been inhabited by anybody for over 10 years because of the same dilapidation, the state in which the building was in. When we talked with the bank manager, it was very surprising that actually they had been trying to sell that building for a very long time. What the residents, complainants, brought forward to the committee was the fact that an earlier bid for the sale was actually about 200 million based on what they received as the deposit of 10%, which was 20 million. And that was just about 3 years ago. So the question was whether within 3 years, a building had, the value of a building had risen from 200 million to 570. So I want to thank the committee for listening to both sides. They listened to the governor and his team, they listened to the petitioners, and they confirmed for themselves the fears of the residents that actually the valuation that was done later may not have been the correct valuation. So it is true that the county government received some valuation, but the valuation was the valuation correct? The question is, did they receive the correct valuation? Can a value of a property in the current state we are in Kenya change from 200 million to 570 within a very short time? So the issues that were raised were, the fears of the community were confirmed by the committee. I want to thank the chair of the committee, Senator Gibiru, and his committee for doing an excellent job. I want to thank Senator Millicent Omanga and Senator Rose Nyamunga for actually walking all the steps in that building. They walked to the top, to the rooftop of the building, and they were able to give a report on what the building was all, the building was actually too dilapidated to be a building worth the money. But not even that. It may not be a building that is worth using for office space. It may have to be brought down before a new building can be brought in. So 570 was in excess of what should have been done. I want to thank them for doing this work diligently, and I believe that the petitioners have gotten a fair conclusion out of the decision by the committee that the county government of Uasin Gishu should never buy the National Bank building. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Farhia.
Mr. Speaker, given that what was submitted by the Chair of Finance and able Senator of Uasin Gishu regarding the dilapidated situation of this building, Mr. Speaker, sometimes I wonder whether we should be doing a proactive audit, or we should be a mortician who just go back and do audits that are not useful to anybody, that people commit crime in terms of economic crime with no consequences. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it's high time that this House should continue doing a thorough job the way they did in this petition, so that when the people of certain counties are being, robbed of their, their allocation, then there is somebody they can rely on, like this House, to ensure that they get justice, so that, Mr. Speaker, they don't pay for something that is not worth. In that building, Mr. Speaker, according to the submission by the people who did the site visit, the first floor and ground floor are the only ones that are functional. The rest finished. There's nothing. Nobody's renting, nothing. So, you know, if you sell that building for, if you buy that building for 570, literally what you're doing is to buy the land. And the question we ask ourselves is that land worth that price? And Mr. Speaker, according to the senator, from 260 to 570, what happened in between? That is the thing that we want to know. What happened? Who was involved in this? Because this is a fraud that was about to happen. And I think it is good that this House has intervened, Mr. Speaker, and then sometimes you wonder, there is a leader who has been elected by their people. And then you ask yourself, who are they protecting? The people who elected them? Or the business people who are about to rob the people who elected them? They entertain a lot of nonsense from other people. Mr. Speaker, I think unless this kind of thorough job is done by this House, and a lot of mischief is traced at its tracks, Mr. Speaker, devolution will be in its deathbed, it will be on its knees, and nothing will benefit the people of each and every county unless this issue of corruption is handled. Because, Mr. Speaker, if the building was valuated at a lower price, by the time it goes more than double the amount that was initially requested, what happened in between? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. And ensure that these governors, these people who are working for the county government, do not fleece their own people. I think let us be on our toes. Let us ensure that we protect property, lives, because the life of the people of any county depends on the kind of services they receive. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Langat, I can see you on off.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for also giving me this opportunity to make a contribution to this very important petition. And I want to say, I know Eldoret for some times. I've been there for around 12 years when I was teaching in Mo University. What I know about the county government of Eldoret, Mr. Speaker, is that they have a lot of land, that they can even develop some very important facilities for their county. And when I heard particularly that they were intending to buy the National Bank building, I was shocked, because that is the same building that we wanted to hire to use for some university courses during our session in town campus for teaching. But when we consulted the public health people, they had condemned. So I was really shocked that the county government wanted to buy that particular building at a cost of around 570 million. That is a waste of government money, of the public money. And we must stand as the Senate of the Republic of Kenya, which actually is entitled by the Constitution to protect our counties, so that we may protect our counties against these particular governors who would like to do anything possible to enrich themselves instead of actually enriching the county government, the counties. So I want to say such particular act should be rejected by this particular Senate with strong terms possible, because it is a way of wasting public funds. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this particular statement that this particular county government should not purchase this particular
As a petition, eh?
This petition. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see another interest. Let me also thank the committee for a job well done, and I'm just, I hope that the recommendations made by that committee will be implemented, because they would have saved the public a lot of money that was actually otherwise going to waste. So let's make sure that that is really followed and implemented, and if we can even get a report on how it has been implemented later, this House will be very grateful, will appreciate, and will have the confidence of those who are bringing petitions to this House. Senator Khaniri, I can see you have an intervention.
Mr. Speaker, your comments brings me back to the point that I've always insisted on this House. In the last Senate, we had a committee on implementation, a committee that would follow up on motions that are passed, on petitions that have been resolved like this one, to ensure that implementation, the actual implementation is done, and the committee would report back to the House. Mr. Speaker, I don't know, when our standing orders were being amended, this particular committee was scrapped out. Without this committee, it is very difficult for this House to make a follow-up on resolutions made by the House and to ensure that they're implemented. Mr. Speaker, I have pleaded here before that we must bring back the implementation committee. Thank you.
Okay, I think we shall conclude that matter because I know we have talked about it in one of the committees where I chair. So I think let me undertake that maybe when we come back, if we go on our short recess, by the time we come back, we should be able to come up with a conclusion on the matter so that we put it to rest. The next order.
Order number 5, papers. Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, statements.
Under standing order 47, Senator Khaniri.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity. I rise pursuant to the provisions of our standing orders, and that is standing order number 47-1, to make a statement on a matter of national concern, general national concern, and that is the impact of COVID-19 on the food security in the country. Mr. Speaker, food security is attained when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics estimates that about 12 million Kenyans are food poor. These are people whose income do not enable them to consume enough calories and nutrients for a healthy lifestyle. 2/3 of these food poor individuals are found in rural areas. These numbers are quite devastating to hear, and yet, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, they are estimated to get even worse. Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 came with numerous challenges. As it continues to affect us as a country, it is difficult to know the extent of its impact on food production and distribution systems. Kenya relies heavily on maize, wheat, rice, and Irish potatoes for food. It is estimated that the country imports about 90% of the total rice demand and about 75% of the total wheat demand. The rest is produced locally, with only about 10% of the total maize demand being imported. However, even before the COVID-19 pandemic knocked on our doors, the country was facing struggles with food production and distribution. Vast and devastating swarms of desert locusts started arriving in the country, and by March 2020, the Food and Agriculture Organization categorized the threat to the country as dangerous because the locusts continued to breed and form new swarms. Before the locust constraints posed by excessive rainfall experienced from October 2019 destroyed about 10,000 hectares of cropland, and post-harvest losses were higher than usual because grain did not dry adequately in the wet weather. This is the context in which the first case of COVID-19 was announced in March 2020, and it all came with many challenges and administrative measures imposed such as curfews, travel bans, and closure of markets. These caused a lot of disruption in food sector. Mr. Speaker, Kenya's food system is heavily dominated by small independent transporters as the link between producers and consumers. Produce markets, which are at the heart of distribution in urban areas, serve consumers and smaller retailers. This traditional informal system accounts for about 90% of the market. The closure of many of these markets in the urban and peri-urban areas was a reasonable measure to avoid the spread of the virus. However, it greatly disrupted food supply systems, especially for fresh produce. Mr. Speaker, the impact is still being felt even up to today. Mr. Speaker, sir, come 2021, when things seemed to be getting better and the effects of the pandemic having subsided, other challenges arose contributing to food insecurity among many households in Kenya. The main contributor of food insecurity in the households today is the rapid increase of the food prices, Mr. Speaker. The price of key food items have increased significantly over the past couple of months, adding pressure on already cash-starved households as many lost their sources of income as a result of the pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the wholesale price of onions is currently quoted at 55 shillings, up from the 35 shillings a few weeks ago. Traders are projecting it to retail at 70 shillings in the next few weeks of low supplies. Cooking oil has also risen, with a 20-liter container of the commodity selling at 3,600 Kenyan shillings compared to 3,000 previously. The cost of bread, which is influenced by international wheat prices, has also gone up by about 5 shillings for the first time in 4 years. Households are now paying 5 shillings more for milk, as there is an increase on the shortage of the commodity in the market. These are just a few items that I have mentioned. Mr. Speaker, food is a basic human need that we cannot survive without. We therefore need to do something about this issue to ensure food security for every Kenyan citizen. I do not deny that the pandemic hit us hard, but now we need to pick ourselves up and encourage each other to make things better for ourselves. We need to create more job opportunities to support those who lost their jobs, thus allowing them to be able to buy food for themselves and their families. We need to encourage the creation of businesses so as to create financial stability for most, if not all, Kenyans. And farmers need to be given incentives to encourage them to produce more food items, and for the commodities that we cannot produce or produce in plenty, importation should be encouraged. These steps will not only impact food security, but will also help in the management of food inflation. We need not to lose hope, but instead stand firm together to make Kenya a better country for each individual. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Senator Nyamunga, I saw Wambua, but you went off. Are you still?
Yes.
Okay, Nyamunga, then yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to support the statement by Senator of Vihiga, Senator Haniri, on the statement on food scarcity and the prices of food going up. Mr. Speaker, I think that as a country, we have not taken the issue of food seriously, because even if, I remember as a women representative, my idea was to get involved with women to do business. But now when we go to the ground, I realized that there is no food security. That even if you did your best and helped the women to get involved in business, there's no way they would succeed in their business because they had not taken care of the food that they eat on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, when we were growing up, I don't think there's any day my mother bought vegetables from the market. I don't think there is a day my mother went to the market to buy chicken or to buy eggs. These are things that were easily available anywhere in any home. But as it is today, it is very difficult for you to find any woman with vegetables because everything we buy from the market. if you look at the issue of chicken and eggs that we eat in this country, and I did a lot of study on it, I discovered that in Kisumu County alone, we consume 12 million eggs. So 12 million eggs times 10 shillings, that's about 120 million that goes to Uganda. I know we should be doing trade with Uganda, but I don't think we should be doing trade with Uganda on basic things like food and chicken, things like eggs and chicken. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that I want to blame the COVID virus for lack of food in this country. I think there is a general lack of commitment or lack of focus on how to provide Kenyans with food. The government should take it upon themselves. One of the Agenda 4 by the government is food security. But if I go to the village, I don't see anything that the government is doing to show that the agenda is food security. For example, the issue of irrigation. Irrigation is still left at the national government. And at the same time, issues agriculture and issues food security is supposed to be by the county governments. So what is water and what is irrigation doing at the national level? Mr. Speaker, if we have to be serious with devolution in this country, what needs to be devolved should be fully devolved. For example, food security or agriculture should be devolved, water supply should be devolved, so that the county governments can be entrusted with the supply of irrigation. The national government is still stuck with irrigation. And they were saying that they are doing that because one of the agenda they have is food security, and they want to make sure that there is irrigation at every level, the lowest level. They were talking of quarter an acre, half an acre, 1 acre. Any land that was lying along any river was supposed to have been supplied with irrigation kits, and the irrigation was supposed to have helped in food security. On the ground, that is not going on. The food security, for me, I would not blame it on COVID virus. It's nothing to do with COVID. But the supply could have something to do with the virus, but not the supply. Kenya has not been serious when it comes to issues food security. We cannot do anything. Our children cannot learn. Right now, we should be thinking of how we even support our children to have lunches in their schools, because most children don't take breakfast, they don't take lunch, even supper sometimes maybe it's just a cup of porridge. So if we can't provide food for our people, and we want to sit at the international table with people who sorted out that problem long time ago, I think we are not getting our priorities right. The issue of food security is very serious. It is in the rural, it is in town, it is expensive. Our people cannot access food of choice. When I was getting into politics, my agenda was women should put food of choice on the table. But that is very far from it. We cannot achieve that if there's no seriousness. I want to support the statement by my colleague, Senator Aniri. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Wambua.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for this opportunity to support this statement by Senator Aniri. Mr. Speaker, I want to start by saying that there is no denying that COVID has seriously and negatively impacted the capacity of farmers to grow sufficient food to feed this nation. But Mr. Speaker, it does not even stop there. The pandemic has also seriously shrunk incomes across businesses and across the corporate world. And so the purchasing power by many, many Kenyans, if not all Kenyans, has seriously and greatly been affected by this pandemic. The Speaker, it shall be remembered that initially when this pandemic landed in our country, the President, and I really want to thank him, issued directive through the National Treasury for tax reliefs for a lot of people. And Mr. Speaker, those reliefs really helped. But now, those cushions have been lifted at a time when the pandemic is hitting even harder, making the lives of Kenyans miserable, really, really miserable. The Speaker, I want to ride on that statement and make a very passionate appeal to the Treasury to look for means and ways of cushioning Kenyans against this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, this pandemic would not have come at a worse time. That today, this country has been invaded by hundreds of millions of locusts. So, Speaker, I just came from the villages in Kitui today, and the devastation by locusts is amazing. And these pests are not just affecting, not consuming food crops, they are actually feasting seriously on pasture. So that affects directly the ability of farmers to produce food and put food on the table, but also the pastures available for livestock is diminishing at a very high and alarming rate. Mr. Speaker, it's a point that then we need to begin to ask ourselves, what became of our national grain strategic reserve? At a time like this, Mr. Speaker, is when we should be seeing government agencies giving relief and cushion to Kenyans across the country who have been affected by this pandemic. The Speaker, as I conclude, I want to say all efforts aimed at ensuring food security must put the Kenyan farmer at the center of this conversation. The Speaker, for as long as the Kenyan farmer is not secure, this country cannot be food secure. And lastly, I want to echo the words and the contribution by Senator Rose Nyamuga on the issue of seriously addressing the school feeding programs so that we have food available to children in schools at all times. In which case then, there will be need to push our farmers to grow more and produce more to feed Kenyans at home and our children in schools. The Speaker, with those remarks, I support.
Senator Musurwe, finally.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to support this statement by Senator Haniri. And it is very clear, Honorable Speaker, that COVID has had terrible impacts on all forms of life, Honorable Speaker. And a case that is less spoken about is its effect on food security. Honorable Speaker, I want to say that even before the pandemic started, there were already locusts that had invaded parts of our country, and they had affected, production of food. And I want to say, Honorable Speaker, that during this COVID time, we've had curfews all over, and this has had a toll on our farmers because there are many times when farmers have been transporting. I know of farmers in Gambogi, where we come from, where my uncles are. They would transport food, they would transport vegetables, sweet potatoes from Gambogi all the way to Gikomba so that they could be sold in wholesale at around 4. But with the curfew, they were not able to do that. People have been transporting avocados. They have not been able to do that just because of COVID, Honorable Speaker. So there's need for us to do an analysis of the impact of COVID on our farmers. Many times we ignore our farmers, but we have to look for mechanisms of encouraging our farmers, Honorable Speaker, because they play a very big role when it comes to issue of food security. So it is just in good faith and in good breath that this statement that Senator Haniri has brought on the floor of this House is taken with the seriousness that it deserves, Honorable Speaker, because the issue of accessibility is very important. I have gone to Gambogi, I have seen farmers selling a basket full of avocados at 50 shillings, simply because they have nowhere to sell. There's no accessibility, Honorable Speaker. And yet when you come to Nairobi and other towns, avocados are usually very expensive. They are hotcakes, but they cannot be transported all the way from Western and other places holidays so that they can come here. So there's need for the government to have a long-term plan of ensuring that farmers are being supported, Honorable Speaker. And even when it comes to disaster management, there should be a plan so that in any form of disaster management, the issue of food security should also be given a center stage, because food is important. When you look at Article 43(1)(c) of the Constitution, it is a socio-economic right that when it comes to food, no one should die of hunger. That is the implication. No one should be hungry. It is a constitutional requirement, Honorable Speaker. So it is the honors of this House to ensure that we are encouraging our farmers, and they're not left behind, Honorable Speaker. Let us address the issue of farming and COVID, Honorable Speaker, so that we bring farmers back to the on foot, Honorable Speaker, because they have value addition in this country. Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me the opportunity. I support the statement, and I hope that when it goes to the right committee, it will be done service, Honorable Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, next statements. Understanding order number 48(1), Senator Judith Pareno. I know you have two statements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the two statements are somehow related. And pursuant to, it's a statement on the arrest of herders by KWS Rangers at the Savo West National Park in Taita Taveta border with Kajiado County. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise pursuant to Standing Order 48(1) to seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Tourism, Trade and Industrialization on the arrest of herders by Kenya Wildlife Services Rangers at the Savo West National Park, which borders Taita Taveta County and Kajiado County. In the statement, the committee should, 1, report on why the Kenya Wildlife Services has ignored the collaboration it enjoys with communities neighboring national parks and began to arrest herders in the ranches surrounding the Savo National Park and arraigning them in court. 2, state why KWS Rangers at the park demand hefty bribes for the same herders purportedly to spare them from arrest and taking them to court. 3, state why the Kenya Wildlife Services officers confiscate livestock belonging to the herders and putting them in mobile fabricated enclosures for long periods of time without food or water, which to me, Mr. Speaker, amounts to animal cruelty, against animal rights, and even against any economic sense, causing a lot of losses to the community. 4, Mr. Speaker, explain why Kenya Wildlife Services continuously harasses these herders and yet fail to compensate them when wildlife wanders into their ranches, destroys their land, and killing their livestock, Mr. Speaker. That is the end of the first statement. Then the second statement is on the same, on related human-wildlife conflict in Kajiado County. Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 48(1), I seek a statement from the Standing Committee on Land, Environment and Natural Resources concerning human-wildlife conflict in Najile area of Kajiado West, Sultan Hamud area of Kajiado East, and Jukini area of Kajiado South in Kajiado County. In the statement, the committee should, 1, state the reasons for frequent cases of human-wildlife conflict in Najile area, Jukini area of Rombo, and Kuku Ward in Kajiado South, Sultan Hamud area in Kinya Ward, and Najile area is in Ewaso Ward in Kajiado County. That is across 3 constituencies where we have havoc because of Kenya Wildlife Management of the animals. Number 2, Mr. Speaker, state when affected residents will be compensated for the loss they have incurred as a result of the persistent human-wildlife conflict, given that some have lost their animals and crops which they depend on for their livelihoods. Mr. Speaker, I remember I gave a list of so many affected in another statement, similar statement that I had done, and no compensation has been done up to date. Number 3, explain the interventions made by the Kenya Wildlife Services to minimize or eliminate cases of wildlife straying into areas inhabited by human beings and killing domestic animals, destroying farms, and posing a threat to life in all these areas that are hosting and bordering national parks and conservancies. Number 4, state the immediate measures, if any, put in place by the government to restore normalcy in Sultan Hamud area of Kenya Poka Ward, where cases of human-wildlife conflict are almost rampant or always rampant and have disrupted social economic activities, including learning in schools. And 5, spell out measures being put in place by the government to provide lasting solutions to human-wildlife conflict in these areas. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Kajwang.
Mr. Speaker, initially I wanted your protection from Senator Irungu Kangata, also known as Usain Bolt, because he came in and he was distracting me from very serious business of the House. But because he has now become orderly, allow me just to request the committee that will be considering these 2 statements also to consider the human-wildlife conflict that exists in the Lake region. Mr. Speaker, my people of Homa Bay have to contend with hippos and crocodiles, and by extension, the people of Kisumu, Siaya, Busia, and those communities that surround Lake Victoria. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it would appear as if the Kenyan government, through its agency KWS, pays more premium to the lives of wild animals than the lives of human beings. Mr. Speaker, just this morning, a community in my county, in an area called Kabondo, were up in arms. This is a community that lives next to a forest. And they are saying they are going into the planting season, and baboons and monkeys are making a meal out of their farms. Yes, Mr. Speaker, the definition of being a Kenyan is not just the human beings, it's also the natural ecology, the wild animals, the flora and the fauna. We must find a formula and a way to live and to coexist with all the natural diversity. But in the hierarchy of beings, Mr. Speaker, the human being must be placed higher. Whenever our people come across hippos and they have to kill those hippos because of the conflict that is unavoidable, it is our people who bear the brunt. And KWS will come and arrest people, and yet sometimes it is the hippos that have transgressed into the grazing lands and into the fields of our people. So, Mr. Speaker, please could the committee go beyond the issues in Kajiado and focus on the areas around the lake, including the areas around places like Ruma National Park in Homa Bay County. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Senator Ali Abdullahi.
Intervention that Senator Pareno asked to the Committee of Tourism and Trade when, according to the schedule, second schedule, issue of wildlife is with the lands and environment. It's not with tourism and trade. So both our statements should go to land and environment. Thank you.
That's true. Senator Msurwe, finally.
Honorable Speaker, thank you for the opportunity. I just stand to support the statement by Senator Pareno. This statement, Honorable Speaker, should be taken with a lot of seriousness because indeed wildlife is very important. We need wildlife because of the economic effects in terms of tourism and how much it can generate an income to our economy. But in as much as we need the wildlife, we have to strike a balance so that we have a win-win situation for both human beings and wildlife. There is need for coexistence of wildlife and human beings, Honorable Speaker, because if children are afraid of going to school because they'll meet elephants that might even hurt them, that might even harm them, this should not actually happen. So there is need for a mechanism to be put in place to ensure that there's a zone for animals and they cannot cross over and encroach on the human beings, because the conflict is because of the resources, competing resources, human beings competing for resources also with wildlife. So there's need for a win-win situation, and I hope that the issue of Kajiado will be looked at seriously so that we have a win-win situation for both the residents of Kajiado and also for the wildlife. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I support this statement.
Senator Rugura.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of human-wildlife conflict has been with us for a long time, but we have been coexisting with this wildlife all this time, especially the pastoralists. But there is that issue of now, of course, population increase and all that. And one thing which I've been a member of the Lands Committee in the previous session, and one issue which the government needs to take into account seriously is budgeting for these compensation. Because we have been following up, and you'll find that there are many cases which have been approved by the county wildlife management and conservation committees, but when they come here in Nairobi, the CS will tell you that we don't have budget for that. So they need to also make sure that they provide enough budgetary provisions. And KWS also needs to sensitize communities, establish corridors, and also have that relationship with the community to ensure that they minimize that conflict. And when there is a conflict, they should be proactive so that the community can only bear with these wildlife if they are compensated for any damages which occur. Thank you.
Next statement by Senator Irungu Kangata.